I remember a friend telling me many, many years ago saying, Keith, the best way to really learn something is to actually get your hands dirty and do it. And you know what? He was absolutely right. Well, a big part for you and I as we go through this course together is to make sure that you get the hands-on practice that you deserve to have to really learn the content. And a great way of doing that is building your own hands-on lab. So in this nugget, you and I get to take a look at some options we have in building a lab to provide that environment for hands-on practice and, my friend, also equally important, to keep us out of trouble. So let's begin our discussion of a lab idea with the user Bob. So Bob is sitting here at this computer right here, and he wants to start practicing, which, by the way, is a great idea. However, it could be really bad news for Bob if he loads up the tools on his computer and starts using them on this network, especially if Bob is not in charge of that network and doesn't have written permission to use the tools. So instead of using a live network that Bob is not responsible for and doesn't have permission for, here's another idea. Bob could create his own network, and for example, maybe here's Bob's PC, and then as part of his lab, he could have other computers, including Kali Linux or Kali Linux, however you want to pronounce that. And Kali Linux is a Linux distribution with tons and tons of attack tools pre-built into the distribution. Also on his test network, we might want to have some various Windows servers, whether it's 2016 or 2012 or some really, really old 2003, etc. And also some Windows hosts. And that might include Windows 7, Windows 8, Windows 10, etc. So up here I'll put WinS for servers and WinH for hosts. There's also some really cool machines out there that we can put on our network to test our attack tools, like Metasploitable, which has some open vulnerabilities ready to go, as well as OWASP's BWA, which is the Broken Web Applications Project. So maybe we add another machine for the Metasploitable, and another one for the Broken Web Application Project from OWASP. And the challenge that Bob might very quickly realize is that, holy shnikers, where am I going to get all these different machines? And the great news is that most of these can be virtualized, so we don't have to have physical systems for each of them. For example, let me clear the board here for a moment. What Bob could do is he could go ahead and have his computer right here. So this is Bob's PC. And Bob could be using an application called a hypervisor. One of the most popular hypervisors out there is from VMware, and it's a product called VMware Workstation. They also have an equivalent version or similar version for the Mac called Fusion, and there are other vendors' products as well. And what these hypervisors like VMware Workstation allow us to do is to create virtual machines on the same computer. So for example, let's say this is the 192.168.1.0 network. What Bob could do is he could create a Kali Linux box as a virtual machine. So I'll put K there for Kali. Or if you want to pronounce it Kali, either way. He could create virtual machines for Windows servers, Windows hosts. He could create a virtual machine for Metasploitable. And the list goes on. Now, here's the trick. If this is Bob's PC and this is a production environment, we really don't, especially without permission, want to allow these virtual machines to have access to this network. So what we could do in VMware Workstation and in other virtualization tools, it's very similar. We could create additional networks. For example, in VMware Workstation, we could create VMnet1. So just think of VMnet1, for example, as a separate virtualized network, meaning it's separate from the physical adapter on Bob's PC. And then, if we logically place the Kali Linux box and the Windows servers and or hosts and the Metasploitable box, and we connect all their virtual network adapters on those virtual machines to this VMnet1, they could all talk to and work with each other, and we could keep that traffic isolated and off of the production network. Now, on the other hand, if this is Bob's home network and he's totally in charge of it and he wants to use this network as well, another option would be to, instead of using a VMnet1, we could bridge each of those adapters from Metasploitable, from Windows, and from the Kali Linux box over to that physical network. And if we did the bridging option as opposed to assigning those VMs a separate network, then it's as if each of those virtual machines is directly connected to this same VLAN, which corresponds to this subnet. In my case, it's 192.168.1.0. And as an additional option, if Bob had two physical network interface cards, so let's say this is the 192.168.1 network, and up here he's connected to the 10.2.2.0 network, So let's call this adapter down here adapter number 1, and this one connected to the 10.2.2 network, physical adapter number 2. Bob could then make decisions on where he wants to connect the virtual machines. Does he want them to connect to the VMnet 1 or some other virtualized network, or does he want to bridge them to the network interface 1, or does he want to bridge them to network interface 2, or do we want to have multiple network adapters in these virtual machines? And I wanted to point out these options conceptually because I want to make sure that you are not accidentally placing virtual machines, especially with the TAC tools that you plan on testing and working with. You do not want to have those actively working on networks where you're not authorized to use those tools. So as you and I go through these nuggets together, I'm going to use the 192.168.1 network. That's my physical/wireless network that's all bridged together in my home office. And I'm going to bridge all of my virtual machines to that network. So as you build your lab environment, just be aware of whether or not you want to actually put those virtual machines on the real network that you're physically connected to or wirelessly connected to, versus connecting all your virtual machines to some virtualized network that's created inside of VMware Workstation. In this nugget, we've taken a look at the concept of using virtualization to create our virtual machines that we can use as a test bed for our lab environment, as well as the concepts of how we can make sure we're keeping that traffic and those virtual machines separate from any type of production or other networks that we're not authorized to use the tools on. I'm glad you joined me for this nugget. I hope this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.